So, welcome to another episode of the podcast. And my guest today is Dusty Crozier, who is a church planner and pastor in up in Ontario, Canada. So welcome, Dusty.
Hey, welcome. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, and so Dusty and I go way back. I think when I first met you, like you were in youth group or something. So I've seen you at all the different stages of life,
Yeah.
and you've seen me age and go through different stages too. Uh, so I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And so why don't we just start out with you giving us a little background, a little spiritual bio of like how you grew up and when you get serious about Jesus and just all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah. So I actually grew up in Quispamsis outside of St. John, New Brunswick. So I'm a New Brunswicker originally there, and went to King's Church. It was Kings Valley Church back then. And my parents really faithfully, I went through the kids program there, went through youth group. I was in church every Sunday. Except for that one Sunday when I was 12 or something, when I informed my parents I wasn't going to church anymore. And my dad, he had a lot of he was wise. It was really neat. There was no argument. He just looked at me and said okay, and they left. There was no fight. There was no and really funny, Mike. They went out for lunch afterwards. They went and got ice cream. They went they did all the fun things without me, and I never said no again. So I it was really good. They obviously knew how to deal with me, right? Yeah. So
Right. So
really,
what was the reason you didn't want to go? Why were you ready to quit church at that point?
yeah. To be honest, it's funny. You're 12, right? I'm not even sure why. Looking back now,
Right.
I know. It's funny as a you talk about people's testimonies and stuff. I grew up in the church and went there every Sunday. Had a great church experience too. It was a great church to be part of, right? So I know I think sometimes if you grew up in the church, you maybe have a harder time looking back and seeing how the devil was at you, kind of thing, or it doesn't show up in the I was doing drugs, I was, all those kind of things. But I
Right.
can definitely look back and see a season there, even as even sort of preteen or around there, where I was probably just starting to rebel in general, right, against lots of stuff and going through some of those things. So yeah, strange looking back now, right?
So at
But
what point did you really like, how you kind of everybody wrestles with their faith and it moves
yeah.
from something you inherit from your parents to your own. Like when did that happen for you? When did you go through
Yeah.
that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I growing up in youth group there, I had great youth pastors. Andrew Maves and Dan Lamus were my youth pastors. People, they were awesome people. And our youth group, it was a discipleship based youth group. It really was. We had lots of fun too, but I remember really being discipled by those people as well. And in the middle of that, I remember really a couple things. A real powerful season where and it probably was over the run of a few weeks, to be honest, where I would say there was kind of revival type things happening at youth group a little bit. There was people coming to Christ and just really people going deeper with the Lord. And it didn't happen at youth group. I remember really succinctly, sort of grade 9-ish or somewhere there, right? Of getting in my bed at night. And this is a cool thing to look back on. Getting in bed at night, falling asleep, and sort of waking up in the middle of the night. And the only way I can describe it is the presence of the Lord was in the room when I woke up. And yeah, and it was real. There was nothing, I don't know how to describe it other than that. And I got up in the middle of the night. And if the sun has set you free, you are free indeed. I just had this sort of sense of the word rolling through me that God was speaking to me and he initiated it. It wasn't like I was looking. It wasn't. And I remember really succinctly, I believe I was a believer at that point. I'd received Christ as a kid. I think I would have been in heaven if I'd been, those old preachers, right? If I'd been struck by lightning, hit by a train, right? Before that, I would have been. But there was a real sense of God's presence and him affirming that I was his child. If that makes any sense, that I was a child of God. I got out of my bed. I knelt on my bedside. It was sort of like William Wallace, your heart is free, son, have the courage to
Right.
follow it. Yeah, it was a really meaningful thing. And I remember the youth group night after that encounter. I was a pretty shy kid, pretty non-confrontational, pretty don't look people in the eye, that kind of stuff. And I remember sort of standing up at youth group and giving testimony to this thing that had happened that I didn't even really understand how it had happened. It didn't happen in church. which is pretty cool for a church kid, right? Like to know that this
Right,
is
right.
something larger than a feeling I got in a group at church or the emotion of what's going on or something. It seemed to be entirely separate from those things. So
Yeah, and
shortly
when
after
I
that, yeah, go ahead.
oh no, when I first met you, it was probably sometime like after that,
Yeah,
because
probably.
you were like one of those, like you were one of those guys, like is you know, sometimes you meet teenagers who are like already like pursuing Jesus, and like
Yeah,
really serious about their faith. And that's my first memory of you as a guy like, oh, this guy's like he wants to serve God. He's gonna
yeah.
go somewhere, and he's
Oh,
gonna
that's
do
cool.
something with his faith. So
Yeah, yeah. And powerful, really two couple of things together. So shortly after that, our youth group had, and I forget what they were even called now. It's hilarious. I've tried to track this person down online. So if you're listening today, Brett Croft, that was his name. I haven't been able to find him. There was a Christian drama group that came to our high school. So this would have been a year or so afterwards. This is a series of events, right? But a year or so afterwards, and these are strange days. You wouldn't be allowed to do it now, right? This is a Christian drama group that came from British Columbia that like did drama at our high school. They did sort of
right.
an assembly during the day that was sort of about making positive choices, and then you came back in the
Yeah.
evening.
Well, yeah,
It,
now like you, yeah, we can't have any morality in school. That
yeah,
would be
yeah, definitely not.
an
Yeah, yeah,
idea, because everybody's doing so well uh,
yeah. In that right now, yeah,
with their
yeah.
secondary
So
theology.
yeah, 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 absolutely, right. Yeah, so this group came and we hung around with them all week. They did drama on the bottom of King Street in front at after dark to a bunch of skateboarders. I saw skateboarders stand up in the middle of his friends and receive Christ, and like just really cool things that were happening. This guy named Brett Croft came to class during the day. He sat in one of our classes, and I'm sitting next to a guy named Eric. And Eric was a sort of, I was a Christ follower at this point, but this guy named Eric was sort of the guy who was always asking for like cigarette money and stuff like that in class. And
Right.
he knew we were Christians, and I don't know, there's sort of that conflict of like, should I give you cigarette money? I don't know. Anyway, he was in class day after day, and this guy named Brett, who was part of this Christian drama team, came to our class, and class ended. Same thing, you wouldn't get away with any of these things now. He looked over at this guy named Eric and said, he's like, my name's Brett. I'm a Christ follower. Like he just put it all out there. No,
Right. Right.
yeah, yeah. I love Jesus, and I think you need to love Jesus too. And I think you should come to like this youth event thing tonight. And Eric came and like accepted Christ at the event like that night. And
That's
we were just,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah. So I followed this guy around all week, and obviously I'd seen Jesus in my family and my parents. I'd seen Jesus in my youth pastors, but there was something about that week, probably the coming together of some events, right, where this guy was really following Jesus and he wasn't afraid. Like, and I, as somebody that probably deals, and I still wrestle with some, like probably has some anxiety problems and things like that. He was, I don't know, there was something about it where it's like, I want to follow Jesus this way. I want to figure out what this is, right? And there was a real turning point after that. My last couple of years of high school, there would have been a group of us, probably 60 of us that were kids from King's Church and other churches in the Valley area that would meet together every Monday morning and pray over the school. There was just the synergy of things going on. In grade 12, the principal's son in our high school had died really tragically on the weekend. And I had a few moments in high school where I had an opportunity to share my faith and kind of fearfully backed away from it. And that last year, grade 12, our principal's son passed away on the weekend. It was sort of this tragedy that kind of rippled through our school. And somebody made an announcement over the loudspeaker that the Christian group was going to pray for our principal, Mr. Monroe, on a Monday morning, right? And my whole high school came outside.
Wow.
And around the flagpole, everybody did. It just sort of happened spontaneously. And I looked over at Andrew Wigston. These are all names that you know, who is the lead singer of Present Reality. He came to our Bible study and helped us, right? And met us at the flagpole in the mornings. And I looked at him and said, well, somebody's got to like get this going, right? And he never said anything to me. I've talked about him since. He never said anything. This is such a Jesus discipleship kind of thing, right? And he just like pushed me into the center of this big circle. It was such a cool thing.
That's true leadership, right?
Absolutely, right? Like he pushed me into the circle, and I had a chance to lead my high school in prayer. And after that, it was not nerdy to be a Christian in my high school, to be a Christ follower. That's the only way I can describe it. We'd walk around the hallways. There wasn't the same sort of, people used to throw rocks at us when we pray, or sticks, or, things like that.
Right.
And it wasn't nerdy to be that after a while. My last year of high school, there was just real I just remember there being really cool ministry as a high school student in the school where there was respect after that day. And I
Yeah, and
thought,
there was a larger context of that. If I'm getting the time frame right,
yeah,
it was like a lot of, there was just a spirit of revival. Those were the revival town days, I think,
yep,
when we used to gather everybody in uptown St. John at the high school
yep,
and have these huge rallies. And there was a sense of like God is moving, God is doing
absolutely,
something, and so you
yeah,
were like a part of that bigger thing that was going on there. And
super special.
you
Yeah,
mentioned you mentioned discipleship kind of being part of a key part of your experience at youth group. And one of the things that how long were you a youth pastor
yeah.
in Roblin? How many years was that, Dusty?
Yeah, so I got raised at Bible College. It's
Yeah.
the first church I went to. I was there 17 years as a youth pastor. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it
Well,
was
and
a long
one of the
run.
things that I noted about your ministry there, other than like the longevity, because like 17 years for a youth pastor is like, it's kind of like dog years. Like if you're a youth pastor and you say somewhere 17 years, it's like the equivalent of 100 years or something.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
but one of the things that I noted about your ministry was like, and it wasn't that there wasn't fun, and all that other stuff, but there was discipleship happening. Like a lot of people came out of that youth group, like being true followers of Christ, which I think is like a testament to your leadership, and was probably passed on to you from the youth leaders that you mentioned earlier. And what were some of the keys to your youth ministry? What was like, because it really stood out to me, like, as this is the way youth group is supposed to work. What were some of the keys to that?
yeah, yeah. I think for me, so much of that it was great to go to Bible college. It was great to go to Kingswood University. It was part of my journey. I'm so thankful for it. But the youth leaders that modeled those things to me as a teenager, they were available. They seem to actually want to be around teenagers. That sounds like a funny thing, but like
Right.
they were on mission, right? Like I think they were, and I think I mentioned their names, both Dan Lamus and Andrew Maves. They were intentional about spending time with us outside of youth group. I've talked to people who it's a question. I'm a church planner, so sometimes people are showing up and you're hearing their stories, right, as they arrive at church and connect to our church, and hearing people tell the story of, we had 8 youth pastors as a teenager, right? I never really knew any of them. Like hearing
Right.
people say that, and I knew mine. Like we did ministry with them. I think there was just this attitude of, they spent time with us, they cared for us, they pushed us. Thinking of Andrew Wigston, he wasn't my youth pastor, but he was involved in that movement of discipleship, of giving people opportunities.
Well, yeah, and if you were like a worship leader in the Maritimes, like chances are you were a product of Andrew Wigston's
Oh,
ministry in some
absolutely.
way, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. So all of those men and women involved in some of those things, right? There was this attitude of real discipleship, of modeling things to us outside of a youth group or a church event, right? And really pushing us into ministry. I remember my first time leading worship at youth group, really, my voice cracking, and just in fear and trembling, singing some, Lord, I lift your name on high, probably, right? Like singing a song that this really simple
all
word.
those songs that people make fun of now, but that
Yeah,
were
all the
actually
ones, yeah,
but that the Lord actually used during that time, right? Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely. And they pushed us towards these things. They released us. I remember a real moment of a season, a year or so of synergy, kind of at youth group, where and there's a ton of pastors and missionaries that came out of this era at King's Church. They're all
Yeah,
over,
absolutely.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where there was this attitude of, I'm thinking of Andrew, especially, in preaching, and him finishing preaching at youth group and there being a worship time. Like I remember nights there where there was no games. We like worshiped and preached and did altar stuff, and there was 100 kids there.
Right.
Like there was just this real neat synergy happen of where he was using his gifts, he was discipling us, and he finished, and there was just teenagers all over the sanctuary praying for each other. Like he had built up this crew of people that were doing ministry with their peers, right, and with people in high school. So there was an attitude at King's Church then too, right? Like I remember leading worship on Sunday morning, like the teenagers were leading service, and they were letting us do things before we were perfect.
Yeah, but yeah, probably, yeah, you probably, they were throwing you in the deep end of the pool. You probably weren't ready, but the Lord like used it anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've tried to at Roblin, where I was a youth pastor for 17 years, these are things that I tried to pass on. And we had this attitude there, and there's still an attitude that way. It's a great church of just sort of, we don't wait till people are 70 till they can play guitar, or we don't wait till they're professionals. I know that there's different models of ministry for those things, but we sort of had this joke, kind of like, Nashville is probably the worst place in America if you're a young teenager trying to be on a worship team. Like,
right.
You'll never have a chance, right? There'll be no, right. There's 500 people better than you
right.
that are going to sound better.
But right off the 401 in Canada, though, it's, you've got a much better chance to
we need
develop,
you.
Right?
Yeah, we need you. Yeah,
right.
So all those things. Yeah, it's been a real honor to see, and a privilege. I get a text message from a teenager that's serving in New Brunswick as a former teenager that is now a youth pastor that was just, checking in, saying, hey, good stuff happening at youth group. I'll have guys call me still and say, hey, this is happening at youth group. What should we do? To kind of see a group of people I'm still involved in their life that way. And my youth pastors, I'm 41, they're still involved in my life.
Right. Yeah. And so it was like a relational thing. It was a real thing, not just a job. Thing. Yeah.
Not just a job. Yeah. And I'm a church planner now, but I'm realizing you never stop being a youth pastor. Like you don't, if your brain is towards or your heart, I should say, if your heart is towards making disciples, you're just going to do it no matter what you do. Like my youth pastor, Andrew Maves, had a season where he was, not in a local church. Dan Lamus was too, I think. Yeah, like where they were both in seasons where they were not sort of in paid ministry roles, and they were still discipling people.
And it was like they were the same people.
Isn't that interesting?
No matter what their job was, right?
Yeah, it wasn't their job anymore, and they still wanted to make disciples. Like what a biblical idea. Like it seems like more of a calling and more of what Christ has asked us to do instead of a job. And boy, COVID has reminded me and reminded all of us, hopefully, of these things, right? When you can't do the big service anymore. You can't, like some of these things have been shut down. I can still make disciples. I can do that till I die,
Yeah. And actually the stage isn't the best place to make disciples anyway. Like it has its place. And it's a lot of fun. Like I've been on a lot of stages and I really enjoy that kind of thing. Like there's part of me that really thrives on that. But most ministry does happen like off the stage. I think most like life-changing kind of ministry happens.
Absolutely.
Those other moments.
One of the things I was talking, this is not to, inflate your head, but I was talking about you the other day. We were talking about, just ministry in general and some of these discipleship issues. And one of the things I said to somebody involved in our cohort of students that are taking Kingswood classes right now online, I just said to him, Mike, and they knew you from seeing you at conference and things. And I said, Mike, I've been with him places where he's speaking at a youth event and there's 300 or 400 people in the room. And I've been with him in a homeless shelter where he's sharing the gospel with like 10 people. And it's the same message. Like he's the same person. It's not like I've always appreciated about you. And I see that as being Apostle Paul. Like I don't see the Apostle Paul looking in like, looking in the room and serious somewhere and going, there's only 5 people here. Maybe we'll go up to I just think he did it wherever he went. Like, what an idea, right? Like just do it. You have the opportunity to share or to or preach.
Oh man, I was around. I know you were like years ago, you were in Peru with me. So you have a little bit of knowledge of, you remember what Peru was like, but like I had this moment in Peru, just, the last time I was there that, we get stuck we were going to this little church plant. We get stuck in traffic. We show up at the church and there's nobody there but the church planter. We're like an hour late and there's literally like nobody sitting in the chairs. So we send this team out to go knock on doors. It's like about 8 at night. And it's like kind of a hazy, foggy, like damp night. It's just really miserable. It's like, it looks like a total failure. And so after about an hour of waiting for the people to come back from knocking on doors, we now have 5 people to minister to. and three of them are children, right? So we got
Yeah.
like two moms and three
Yeah.
children. And but you know what was awesome? Like we just did the service anyway. And like all five of them were not Christians, and all five of them gave their lives to Jesus at the end.
Awesome.
And it's just that, and the Lord was reminding me, like, it's not about everything going perfect. It's not
Yeah.
about like having a big crowd and having all the right equipment. Like sometimes the best moments happen in these little out of the way places, and where everything seems to be going wrong, and then like boom, the Lord shows up. And like I would trade a lot of the like I wouldn't trade that for like a lot of the bigger events, right? Like that's stuck
Yeah.
in my memory as a time where like the Lord just really like spoke to me and reminded me of like some key things. And the same way that you've been mentioning some people and affirming them, Dusty, I want to like, I don't know if you hold the record. Like, I don't think anybody's done the math, but you may have been like the youth pastor that sent more people to study ministry at Kingswood than any other, than any other person. You definitely, there's a long line of people that you have discipled and sent them on, and now they've graduated and they're out like discipling other people.
Cool.
And so, maybe in the middle of COVID, we all need to hear a few encouragements like that,
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so jumping ahead to like where you are now, how long
Yeah.
have you, like when did you launch the church that you're at now? Tell us a little bit about it and
Yeah.
kind of what that
Yeah.
looks like.
I'd been a youth pastor for 17 years, and we kind of knew that the Lord was leading us somewhere else, and we're kind of starting to sense that. And my wife, she's a go-getter. Like if God speaks, she just goes. And I'm a little bit more drag my feet. I'm being honest, a little bit of just sort of wanting details, right, and wanting some more signs in the sky and some of those kind of things. And we were sensing that. And I remember my wife really, I was talking like a church planter, right, and saying those kind of things and having these conversations. And I remember my wife, we were driving somewhere, and she just said, I think God has gifted you to do this. I think you just need to go do it. Like, I think you need to get over yourself and just kind of go do it, right? So
Right.
only our spouses can say those things to us, right, in the way that we'll receive. So it was right. She was absolutely right. And God, it's God's church. I need to be reminded of that too, right? When we're feeling, feeling like we don't know what we're doing.
Right.
It's His church. So we knew that. And I remember sitting down with our senior pastor and saying, hey, we're feeling called to go plant a church. There were some other key moments, really cool things, really key moments leading up to this. I skipped a step there, but I was sitting with a gentleman from Roblin Wesleyan in a coffee shop, and he didn't know any of this was going on in our heart, right? And he just said, elderly John, I shouldn't say elderly, older guy than me, Richard. And if you're listening, Richard, I meant that. Yeah, Richard looked at me and said, "Have you ever thought about planting a church?" And I hadn't talked to him about any of this stuff, and I kind of had to be honest. I was like, actually, you know what? We've really been thinking about this the past little while. And he said, "Have you ever thought about planting one in Loyalist in Amherstview? Like this is the region we were looking at." Nobody told him, right? He just really need confirmations along the way. I remember having a moment where we were like, we can't do this. Roblin Wesleyan Church hasn't paid their mortgage off yet. We're going to be taking a team from their church to do it. And I remember having that conversation with God, and their mortgage got paid off that week. Like somebody gave tens of thousands of dollars to
Wow.
pay it off.
Yeah.
And they didn't know any of this was going on, right? It just
Right.
happened, right? So little simple things like that. And I talked to our senior pastor. He was for it and excited about it. He's a missional guy. And over a year or so, we prepared. There was a team of probably 40 adults, teenagers, and kids.
And that's a pretty good start when you've got like a team of 40 to go with, right?
Absolutely. And it's a sacrifice. If anybody from Roblin Wesleyan's listening here, like it's a sacrifice. This is not this church was, it was not a church that had 2,000 people at it, right? When you send 40 people, you notice
40 is
right?
a pretty good chunk, right?
It's a chunk. Yeah. And it's sort of like, when you send your kids to college, I'm assuming, right? They're excited to leave and are pumped. And it's the parents who are kind of grieving maybe, right, when they leave. And we had the excited part, and they had the grief connected to it, I'm sure, and the sacrifice.
Right.
And they've been so good and encouraging since. They've been wonderful. but probably 40, and that, some people from some other churches and as well that just were sort of believing in the mission and some of those things. And we launched, our churches will be 3 years in May. So we've spent most of our time church planting during COVID. Yeah. So it's been crazy.
An ideal time to start
A
something
great
new.
time. Yeah. So we went maybe eight months, somewhere around there, planting during COVID. And
And were those like 8 months where you were kind of like soaring a little bit and feeling really good about it? And
absolutely. Yeah, like to be honest, like everybody that plants churches, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about being a church plant, like you read those stats, right? That 50% of them don't work out within a year. You read them. I was aware of them, and I had to get to a place where I just sort of said, Jesus, I'm going to follow you with this, whether I fail or not. Like I'm throwing myself out here. Failed church planters don't often get invited to speak at chapel. Like these are things that I said in my brain was like, this really might. Like I may be doing something else after this. Like if things don't go well, these are things I was reminded. I just sort of said, well, God, I'm going to go fail for you if that's what you want, or I'm going to go succeed for you, but I'm going to follow you, Yeah. So I'm talking about it.
And so,
yeah.
So since you guys were under like some pretty heavy lockdown measures there for.
Absolutely.
So did you have to was it hard for you to put everything on? Did you have to do the go online route and do all that stuff?
Yeah. So we'd grown to probably 120 people on a Sunday within those 8 months. We had a baptism. We baptized people. People came to Christ. Like some of those initial, this is like working. Like there was excitement. There was energy. It was refreshing. If you've been a youth pastor forever and you suddenly are in a small group with adult men or things like that, like there's parts of it that were they were just awesome for me too, right? They were refreshing for me personally. And we hit lockdown. We were not online before this at all. We were meeting at a high school or at a public school gym.
So you had a really steep learning curve there, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like we had to shut down before other churches too, right? The schools shut down before the churches were shut down. So we're at a guy's basement studio Saturday night trying to figure out how to record church and put it online. All of us doing all these things and scrambling. It's a funny memory now. So everything went online. Ontario regulations and rules, I think, compared to the Maritimes, I think we had some longer and harder lockdowns. Like there were several seasons here where there were stay-at-home orders where I remember pulling into our little village. We live in a sort of a hamlet out in the country a little bit, and there's yellow tape around all the playground equipment, like that kind of lockdown, right? Like kids aren't allowed to be in the park, aren't allowed to and churches at certain points were either absolutely shut down or you could have 10 people at church, right? So everybody just shut down. Everybody went online. And the hardest thing and the strangest thing for us, when all the churches rallied and when there was a reopening for a few months before the next lockdown, they all kind of rallied and went back to in person. But because we were using rental space, we didn't, right? So a lot of our stuff had to remain online when everybody else opened. And it forced us, we did some online conferences. We just sort of tried to be creative and find some unique ways to connect with people. Mike, you were part of a couple of those. And
that was fun. I enjoyed that because I was locked in my basement as well. So
yeah. So things that we'd never done before. I had a great team, my tech team. I am clueless with some of these things, and I had great people just doing some of those technical things, and really cool. I had interviewed Mark Clark from the Village Church in British Columbia.
Yeah, he's great.
Interviewed Cindy Klassen during conference. She was a 6 medal Olympian, right? Speed skater, believer in Christ, and the lead singer of Hocus Pick. Yeah, just for those of you who remember the 90s.
Wow. I remember the 90s. Let's say it backwards. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I found him online. It was like, that'd be kind of cool to interview. He's kind of got a neat life story and how God worked among them during those days. He's a worship leader now in British Columbia. So did some just interesting things like that. We bumped into somebody. My wife works at a nursing home in town a day a week, and I bumped into somebody there the other day that sort of somebody that was there at a memorial service, so a younger person that was there for that, and they said, hey, yeah, we saw one of your conferences online. Like it's reached some places and still is that we wouldn't have ever thought of, right? So lockdown, nobody's going to church anywhere. It was sort of a neat thing to do in the weekend that there were these sessions available, and it worked really well.
Yeah, so we've had some here. We've had like some government overreach, and there's been some issues with churches where and maybe like I'm not pointing any fingers. It may have there was probably some moves on both sides of the spectrum that were a little maybe not the wisest kind of moves, because we're all like figuring this out together. But
Yeah.
yeah, but a lot of pastors that I talked to were kind of like feeling caught in, and I felt this sometimes too, like you're kind of caught in the middle, like no matter what decision you make, uh, some people are going to be, really happy with you, and other people are going to be really unhappy with you, and it's especially most pastors that I know have tried to stick in the middle, to like
Absolutely.
do something balanced and wise, and not to either extreme, but then you kind of get shot from both sides. And so it's have you guys wrestled with any of that in Ontario, or is it?
Yeah, absolutely, right. It's we see things on the news. There's churches, I won't name them, right, around the country who
Right.
said no to any kind of rule or any kind of thing like that, and they've remained open. We tried to really do a middle ground approach too, and I tried to be really careful. I didn't even want to ask anybody if they were vaccinated or not. Like, there's so many issues within this that I think the devil has gotten right a hold of some of it to cause division in the church, right? Whether people are vaccinated or not, whether they're masking or not, whether they're, all we know, right? All the dynamics and all the
Right.
the controversies around it. And absolutely, we try to take a middle ground in what we were doing as far as our public gatherings. We were put in a really strange position. Our church was, as a church plant, and somebody out there right now is maybe listening to this, and we'll let you know you can survive this, right? Yeah. So we were put in a strange position of having to. We're meeting at a hotel. So public meeting places in Ontario require a vaccination proof, right, to get in. So churches were exempt from that, which I think on their part, they're making decisions with lots of different data or advice from different advisors, but churches were exempt for that rule. And because we were in a church plant in a hotel, we were given sort of notice that we had to ask for this. The hotel required it, and the hotel, lovely people. We're so thankful for them. They've been so accommodating. We're thankful. They've been wonderful, but they're just following the rules, right? They're following the
Right.
rules they were given. And so I had a really hard week where I was wrestling with, like, do we ask this or do we shut down? And you got to remember, for us as a church plant, other churches have reopened off and on through this whole thing when we were not able to, right? So God was still working. He was drawing people. We've grown during the pandemic some. But we just been open for like a month, and to shut it all back down again. And this is during a season where you can't go rent a school. Like, there's no school to rent yet in our region, right? They've all been off limits. So as far as finding a meeting place, and even some local churches, some local churches would have been uncomfortable with us meeting in their space too, of just fears of what if we're connected to the COVID outbreak. The mentality in Ontario probably a little different even than down east, right? I know proportionally we're in a larger province, but when you see the number come up, like 4,275 cases today, right? Like in an urban center, if you're in an urban center in Ontario, I think people were quite a bit more. Um, what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, people
Alert.
are kind of like
Oh, yeah.
in protective mode, like
In protect,
yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I think there was a real sense of that protective mode that took over. So so I, for about a week there, I really prayerfully wrestled, and we had
And
people.
you're a people person too, so it's like
Absolutely.
that these things would be harder for you than for some others,
Oh
maybe.
yeah. I love when everybody's happy with me. And I love when
Right.
I'm happy with everybody else, right? Yeah. So I just knew no matter what, there's going to be people upset, and we prayerfully for a week did make a decision. And we were at a kids event in the park, and I saw some kids that had just connected, a family with some kids that had just connected to our church. Um, yeah, and people that don't have a relationship with Jesus coming to church, right? Things like this happening, that are seeking things like that. And knowing that, for the most part, a larger proportion of our congregation would be vaccinated. And I had to kind of make this really hard call of, like, I think we're just going to stay open and follow through on this, and say you have to be, our facility is asking
Right.
that
Right.
you be vaccinated. It's not something that we have made a decision on personally that you must be, or any of these things. So Yeah, so people did it. Our church rolled with it. There's people that within our church that have lots of different ideas about vaccines and passports and masks and all things, but they understood the rationale, right? They understood the heart of like, we are going to stay open for those who are here right now. And some others are going to meet in houses like they were through the pandemic the whole way through, right? In a small group, and knowing that the future is holding hopefully a more permanent place where we can meet, where this isn't an issue, right? So yeah, they roll with
Yeah,
it.
and that's probably a testament to your to discipleship and to your leadership, that people were willing to put to put the bigger picture ahead of their own personal preference, because that's like, I find a lot of people are just they are in that protective mode, and they're in that mode where, like, well, you can't, like, my preference, is
Yeah,
takes preference over everything. And when we step back and see the bigger picture, sometimes it helps us to get along better.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And everybody connected to our local congregation, whether they were pumped about the issue or not, at least held on to the mission. The ones that are connected to our church. I know in the greater community of things, right? As pastors, when you make decisions like this, there'll be lots of people that are upset about it, and of just
Yeah,
navigating
and
what to do.
sometimes you just have to make hard decisions where you know that
Absolutely.
there's going to be people that are unhappy, but like, the decision has to be made. So
Absolutely. And my heart of hearts, I actually called our premier's office. I didn't get a hold of him. I got one of his handlers, but in my heart of hearts, when I think of the issue, it's like I've always been somebody that felt like you should be able to just show up at church no matter what's going on in your life,
right.
vaccinated, unvaccinated. We were thrown into this situation. It's been hard for us to find another place. We decided to plow through, but long term, definitely not my heart. Like, you should be able to show up. You got out of jail, go to church. You got to, like, you should
Right.
be able to find a
Right.
church. You should be able to find a church somewhere. My grandparents told me of the era when all the church buildings in town had their doors unlocked at night, right? Like,
Right, because
if you were
that the church was never locked, right?
yeah, if you were homeless or hitchhiking, I could at least go sleep at a church, right? And that
Yeah.
part of being a
And
place where
there's something beautiful about that, and the openness, and also in the respect from the larger culture, that we will go in and sleep there and appreciate
yeah,
it, and not steal things, right? Like, there
yeah,
was just
yeah, my
an
yeah,
understanding all the way around.
absolutely. My grandpa told me that too. That it worked both ways, right? There was
Right.
also this sort of, you never take something from a church, right? Like, most of the culture
Right.
80 years ago, they would have felt like they would have been struck by lightning when they left, right? So I
Right.
sleep here, but this is a sacred place, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that built-in kind of respect for God, that
absolutely.
is, well, I guess we shouldn't be surprised when you take God out of the schools.
Yeah,
You were talking about how different your school was back in the day, when you kind of remove God from the schools. We shouldn't be surprised that people start acting in ungodly ways, right?
absolutely,
Just
right? Yeah,
like, it's
absolutely.
just the way things work.
Yeah.
So, man, it's been great to talk to you. Just kind of wrapping up here. I usually give people just like a minute at the end to. Uh, I think the last time I did a youth rally for you, which has been a few years now, but I think there was one moment where I spontaneously I think it was like a morning session after an all-nighter. And the way I just spontaneously, like, dropped the mic, and it made a loud noise, and then I walked off. So I want to give you a mic drop moment where you can,
Yeah.
where you, like, if you had just one thing to communicate to the world right now, one thing that you could say to everybody to encourage them, what would it be?
Yeah. Uh, you know, uh, Through the whole pandemic, there were certain times where my wife and I, right, we're planting a church during a pandemic, and there's been moments where we kind of look at each other. I know you feel like you're sort of moving past it at the stage, right, where we've looked at each other and said, like, man, I don't know what's going to happen. And I had to have some really heart searching moments of just sort of, what's it going to be like to, I don't know, to fail at this, or have things, or have that weight. And I really felt it was really neat to just have experienced the Holy Spirit say, like, none of this is a surprise to me. Like, God's not surprised by pandemic. Um, the church has endured way, and I'm not trying to negate. I know COVID's been awful, right? Some of you have lost your jobs if you're listening. Some of you have lost loved ones. Like, absolutely, we know people that have, right? It's
Mhm.
been awful, but the church has endured really awful things through the centuries and found a way to survive and thrive and move forward through it. If you go looking for COVID, when the pandemic happens, you're looking for articles online to help you navigate it as a pastor through pandemic. And like, you're finding stuff about like the Spanish flu in 1918 and like, the Black Death. Like there's not really a precedent for it, right? In a lot of different ways to try to figure out how to navigate. And you're reading stuff like the clergy during the Black Plague just went around burying people all day. That's all they did. So as disruptive and awful as this has been, you're calling to follow Jesus, you're calling to preach, you're calling to make disciples, you're calling to move forward. It endures, right? And despite the loss of an income, the loss of a whatever, fill in the blank, right? You had all these great plans. I talked to pastors who were, or have heard stories, right? It's like the pandemic launched on a month before they were supposed to launch their new building.
Right.
Like just heartbreak, like all that work that went into all this stuff. And I can't imagine, right? All these disruptions. And, Mark Clark said in one of my interview with him, he said, at some point you do kind of go like, I'm just called to do this. And I wonder, this is my thought this week and I'll wrap her up here, but we've always had this idea that being faithful to Jesus means we're going to be successful. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Like
whatever that means, right? That there'll be some sort of.
Well, and we usually have an idea of it in our head, what it means for us, right?
There'll be some sort of earthly crown here, right? We'll be able to look back and look at our successful journey. And I just see all sorts of people through Christian history who their crown was just in heaven. Like as far as any kind of books written, textbooks, we've forgotten their names. They were martyred. There was no mega church. There was no any of that stuff. And they were absolutely faithful. That's all I got.
Yeah, that sounds like a good place for us to end. So I'm thanks so much. This has been a really great conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. I'm gonna hit pause now, and then maybe we'll have a few more minutes we can just chat by ourselves. So
awesome.
Thanks, everybody.